Aemeath has been out for a couple of days now, and I think it's been long enough for me to fully form my opinions on her. So in this video, I'm going to talk about them. First, I'm going to talk about her performance in Tower, then her performance in Whimpering Wastes, then her value within Doubled Pawn Matrix, and then finally, I'm going to talk about the points I made in my pros and cons video to see if I was right about her or not. Starting, of course, with her performance within Tower of Adversity. Now, it was a little bit hard for me to form a fully just normal opinion of this character, because every single stage within the current middle tower of Adversity has some sort of effect that positively affects Aemeath. The first two floors have lower fusion resistance and will give fusion damage bonus and attack after intro skills, and then floor 3 and 4 have the most diabolical Toon Rupture damage increases I have ever seen. So that makes it incredibly hard for me to fully and accurately gauge this character's performance within Middle Tower. But based on what I am able to see of this character, she is absolutely ludicrous. Within my expectations, of course, because I knew that as the Sentinel Resonator equivalent of the region, Aemeath was going to be stupidly powerful. Remember when Cardathea came out? Yeah, back then she was also just way stronger than everyone else. And over time, new supports were added that allowed the other characters to catch up to her. I'm assuming the same thing's going to happen with Aemeath. Aemeath is currently the top dog and simply no one can compete with her, but over time, because we're going to get more supports, there are going to be more characters that are able to actually get into Aemeath's range. Because as it currently stands, this is the best Tower of Adversity DPS in the game, by a pretty wide margin. According to my and other people's calculations, Aemeath is going to be approximately 20% stronger than Cardathea, which, considering how strong Cardathea was and still is kind of absurd. So when it comes to pure damage output, yeah, she's got it. But are there any other things about Aemeath's gameplay that I noticed? Well, one thing is for sure, and that is that her rotation is incredibly smooth. She does have multiple rotations that allow you to choose between whether you want to do something easy and simple, or something that has a couple more button presses but will also get you faster clear times. So no matter if you're really good at the game or not that good at all, Aemeath is pretty easy for you to pick up and see results with. One thing that I did notice is that when she is in her mech form, her dodge is a little inconsistent. The timing is a little different from a regular character, and the dodge distance is also different. So if you're trying to dodge with the mech, you might run into some issues, but I believe that people will start learning the timing over time. To be entirely fair, it's not like it's easy to be interrupted when you're in the mech form or anything. If you're just doing your basic attacks with the mech form and getting hit, it's fine, because you're most likely not going to get knocked over anyway. She has pretty good interruption resistance, especially if you're playing her with Mornia on the team. So the dodge being a bit wacky isn't that big of a deal, but it is something to note. And that brings us to Whimpering Wastes, which is Aemeath's worst game mode when we're looking at all the endgame modes. And guess what? It's for reasons that I entirely predicted. It's not exactly an AoE issue or a damage issue. Rather, it is a consistency issue. The best DPSs in Whimpering Wastes are those who do damage almost all the time. This is why Flova is so absolutely broken within the game mode, because there is never a moment where Flova is not doing significant damage. However, with Aemeath and also her teams, it's a little bit different. Aemeath's best teams when it comes to pure DPS are all hypercarry focused teams, that all focus on buffing Aemeath as much as physically possible. However, these are not super good in Whimpering Wastes, because these types of hyper-buffing supports usually do very little personal damage of their own. This doesn't mesh well with Whimpering Wastes, which means that her team comp structure is simply not optimal for the game mode. And then we look at Aemeath herself. She's primarily focused on a couple of nukes within her kit, being her first Liberation cast, her 2 Forte skills, her heavy attack, and then her Liberation finishers. These are all very big damage windows that you're able to take full advantage of in Tower. However, in Whimpering Wastes, half of the damage is going to nuke the enemy wave, and then the other half is being completely wasted. So ultimately, Aemeath just doesn't mesh that well with the game mode. However, she does have some things in her benefit. First of all, being Fusion gives her access to being able to run with Brant and Lupa, which is very good because Brant and Lupa are both very good damage dealing characters. That means she does actually have some teammates that focus less on hyper buffing. The other thing is that Aemeath's personal damage is just absolutely bonkers, which means that even if you put her in a hyper carry based team comp, you're still going to clear completely fine. Because, sure, Aemeath might be wasting a lot of her damage, but she's still doing an absolute ton of damage, which is not to be ignored. She's no Frolova, and she's not even an Augusta if you ask me, but she's still going to be completely fine within the game mode in all reality. And that's how it's been with a lot of characters recently. They don't really mesh that well with the game mode, but because they just do so much damage, they're still going to be completely fine when it comes to clearing. Just know that this is not exactly her specialty. At least at the current moment, because I believe that Kuro Games' intention is to make the Fusion Burst team better in Whimpering Wastes. This is very easy to see in her sequences, because when you look at her second sequence, it promotes using Toon Break against single target bosses, and it has some mechanics that promotes using Fusion Burst when there is a lot of enemies. So I do think the Fusion Burst team is going to end up being better in Whimpering Wastes. And that brings us to Doubled Pawn Matrix. We don't actually have access to Doubled Pawn Matrix yet at this current moment, because it's only going to open 1 week after the update's been live. However, we already know how the game mode works, so I can still talk about what her value within the game mode might be. And I believe she's going to have similar value to a character like Cardathea. While her score is going to be higher than Cardathea's, Cardathea uses less universal characters. So ultimately, if you want to use Aemeath within Doubled Pawn Matrix, your Lene and Mornia are most likely going to go to her to try and jack up her score as much as possible. But Lene and Mornia can also very easily go into other teams, whereas characters like Shakona and Chisa have a lot harder of a time trying to do that. Again, this is something that the Fusion Burst team is most likely going to address, so you can pull for the Fusion Burst Aemeath team and use that in Doubled Pawn Matrix instead. But guess what? The Fusion team isn't out yet, so yeah, you're not gonna be able to do that yet. And that finally brings me to the points I made in my pros and cons video, starting with the fact that I believe Chio is going to have an insane damage output. And, well, if we look at the character on release right now, we can see that that was most definitely true. Of course her damage output's insane. I don't think I have to talk about this one in much more depth. Then I said she was going to be the best fusion DPS, which is also true. She surpasses Galbrenna by leaps and bounds. Then I also said she was going to have multiple team archetypes. And yes, this is true. She has the Toon Rupture team and the Fusion Burst team. However, of course, there is a bit of complexity to the situation, because the Fusion Burst team isn't finished yet, and trying to run Lene Chisa in the Fusion Burst mode is just going to be worse than running the Toon Rupture mode. So ultimately, she is currently only locked to Toon Rupture, but when we get the Fusion Burst support, the Fusion Burst team will also become available. I also said that she was going to have plenty of teammates, which is also true. Characters like Brant work well with Aemeath, and of course she has the choice between Lupa and Lene when it comes to her premium team options. And then Mornia can also pretty easily be subbed out for characters like Shorekeeper or Verena. And that's not even touching into the Fusion Burst stuff yet, because, again, like I said, Fusion Burst currently doesn't exist yet, but it is going to exist in the future. So she does have more than enough team options. I also said that she can easily use Emerald of Genesis, because Emerald of Genesis is just a very good universal sword. However, what I did not see coming is the fact that Emerald of Genesis ended up in fact being her second best in slot weapon, being better than every single limited weapon currently available. So that's very nice for everyone who wants to get Aemeath but isn't sure if they can get her signature weapon. You will still be completely fine on EOG. Then for the cons, first I said that she was contingent on limited 5-star characters, and I do think this is true. Even if you're trying to run her in a Genshin or Shorekeeper comp, you're gonna start to see yourself struggle a lot more. However, the second you add Lene or Lupa, her team options become a lot more plentiful. If you only have Lupa and Aemeath on your account, you're still able to run Mortefi and Lupa for your Aemeath. But without those characters on your account, you're gonna start to struggle a lot more. Genshin and Shorekeeper just won't really cut it. I also said her multi-wave was going to be less strong than her single target. And based on what I said during the Whimpering Waste segment, this is still very true. I don't need to expand on this too much though, because I've kinda already done that in the Whimpering Waste segment. And then finally, I said that the Fusion Burst mode just isn't good yet. And, well, technically you can say I'm wrong, because you can run the Fusion Burst mode with Lene and Chisa and it'll still clear endgame. However, here's the thing. Why would you ever do that when you can just run the Toon Break mode instead? The Fusion Burst mode isn't bad per se, it's more so bad in comparison to the Toon Rupture mode. However, I believe that the Fusion Burst mode is going to start seeing a lot more relevance the second we get that Fusion Burst support. But those are just my thoughts on Aemeath. Let me know what you think of her down in the comments below. And while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Additionally, if you have any questions, be sure to join my Discord server, linked in the description down below. And if you just want to see more of me, you can check out my second channel, which is also linked in the description. But that'll be all from me. Peace.